I was named after my dad's dad, Troy Campbell Burns, who was of 100% Scottish descent. My dad, 50% Scottish DNA, and of course I've got 25% Scottish blood, so Kathy and I decided we'd better take a trip to explore Scotland. We were able to pull off a 9-day trip in early May of 2025. The goal was to power tour as many places in Scotland as possible, get in some scenic hikes, catch the Highland Games, and also explore the valley where my direct Campbell ancestors lived for about 1,300 years. We researched and planned this vacation in great detail, laid out the full itinerary in Google Calendar and Google Maps, booked everything possible in advance, knew how we would travel, where we would stay, where we would eat, and pretty much when we would come and go. We couldn't plan the weather, but amazingly we had only about 1 hour of rain on one afternoon over the entire trip. We did learn that early May is the time of year that gets the least amount of rainfall. So here are the highlights, boiled down to about 20 minutes. We started in Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. We arrived at Edinburgh Airport early Saturday morning, grabbed our rental car, and headed to our hotel, the Radisson Blu on the Royal Mile in Old Town. We spent the entire day exploring Edinburgh on foot. Good exercise, and we were able to pack in all the highlights we wanted. The Royal Mile is a busy area with centuries-old buildings, narrow alleys, and a lot of popular attractions. We first headed to St. Giles Cathedral, an amazing Gothic medieval Presbyterian church built in 1124. It's considered the mother church of Scottish Presbyterianism, and John Knox was its minister in the mid-1500s, playing a crucial role in the Scottish Reformation. We headed west toward Edinburgh Castle, taking in all the sights and sounds. Our first scheduled ticketed stop was the Scotch Whisky Experience. Of course, in Scotland, whiskey isn't spelled with an E as it is in Ireland. Our guide explained the history of Scotch whiskey, how it's made, and showed us the world's largest collection of Scotch before an educational whiskey tasting. Kathy, who really doesn't like the taste of whiskey, was a really good sport and tasted each of the selections we were offered.
Unfortunately, that is where the tour ends. There are 400 more bottles through there, folks, so feel free to have a look at those. More importantly, folks, there's of course a bar. So if you want to try some more whiskies, any recommendations?
Then to the most famous attraction in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Castle. There's been a royal castle here on Castle Rock since the 11th century. Over the centuries, it's served as a royal residence, arsenal, treasury, national archive, mint, prison, military fortress, and still the home to the honours of Scotland, the Scottish crown jewels. It's an impressive castle, obviously built in multiple stages over many, many years. Since our plane arrived late, we didn't have as much time as we planned to explore more of the attractions on the Royal Mile, like the National Museum of Scotland, Victoria Street, and the Grass Market area. We instead prioritized a tour of the Palace of Holyrood House at the far east end of the Royal Mile, exactly 1 mile from Edinburgh Castle. It's the official residence of the British monarch in Scotland, and King Charles actually arrived the day after we were there. We love to hike whenever we vacation, and there's a fairly legit hike from the Holyrood House up Arthur's Seat, which gives a wonderful view of all of Edinburgh. We did it as an out-and-back hike of about 3 miles with 850 feet of elevation. In addition to the sweeping views, we were introduced to gorse, called whin in Scotland. Gorse is a flowering evergreen shrub that's widespread across the UK, and it was at peak bloom when we were there, with bright yellow flowers that smell like coconut. From Arthur's Seat, we hiked down to the first of many pubs on our trip. We enjoyed the Brewdog Doghouse for pub fare and a locally brewed beer before walking back to our hotel for the night. Day 2 of our trip began with the first of several traditional Scottish breakfasts, including my first taste of haggis, black pudding, and tatty scones. There was no way Kathy was going to try haggis, made from the organs of sheep with oatmeal cooked inside of sheep's stomach. We then packed the car and headed to the first landmark of my Campbell family history. Castle Campbell overlooks the town of Dollar, about an hour's drive northwest of Edinburgh. It was the lowland seat of the Earls and Dukes of Argyll, the chiefs of Clan Campbell, from the 15th to the 17th century. It was visited in the 16th century by Mary, Queen of Scots, and John Knox, intermittently used for military purposes, and was attacked and severely burned by Royalist forces in 1654.
Things were pretty good for the Campbells right up until 1654 when things went horribly wrong.
Castle Campbell is one of the 3 most significant castles in Clan Campbell history. We visited the other 2 later in our trip. We then headed north about 2-hour drive into the eastern Highlands and the Cairngorm mountain range for an appointment with a herd of reindeer.
The Cairngorm Mountains are the only place in Scotland with a subarctic ecosystem, which essentially means it's very cold.
Kathy was very excited to meet and feed Britain's only free-ranging herd of reindeer in their natural environment. Our guides educated us about the reindeer and the geography.
The first thing I'm going to tell you about, because it's what people are always really interested in, is antlers. So these things on their heads, they're not horns, they're antlers. There is a difference. Horns are sort of keratin and they're permanent. Antlers are made of bone and they grow every year on a cycle.
This was the coldest part of our vacation and the only time we had any weather. It was a bit surreal to be visiting and feeding reindeer below snow-capped mountains as it actually started to snow.
They're so cool. They're lighter colored than I thought because they have their winter coat on.
I know. They know the drill.
Yet.
That's Beret, so she's one of our hats, and Hemp you've got there as well. Who else is ready for some feeding?
Okay, I still have some.
There we go.
They haven't figured that out yet, huh?
Figure out that I still have some.
Oh, you might get someone else
I might
greedy.
get another taker.
Here comes somebody sneaking
You've
around
got Hemp behind you. He's
Hi.
greedy. Fab, he is a bit shy, so she wants actually to see out my back, which is not loud. Okay, who
Here
is
comes
ready?
another
You
one.
ready?
They're lining up.
Right
They know where to go to the Mimi.
Okay, now we got it.
The reindeer were quite friendly since they knew we had food. We even saw a couple of calves and a very pregnant mom. We ended our day and spent the night in Inverness, the largest city and cultural capital of the Highlands. We checked into our bed and breakfast, the Dianard Guest House, and then walked down to Old Town Inverness for dinner and live entertainment at the Highlander. We picked the Highlander because of their reputation for traditional Scottish music, but found the pub food to be excellent. Kathy said it was the best steak and ale, shepherd's pie, and sticky toffee pudding she'd ever had. Of course, my fish and chips and another local brew hit the spot as well. After another traditional breakfast at our B&B, we spent the morning of day 3 exploring Inverness. We started by walking the River Ness Trail, an easy 2-mile loop down both banks of the River Ness, over bridges onto the Ness Islands, and ending back in the Old Town area. Kathy got her souvenir shopping done for the grandkids at a couple of shops, and then it was time to hit the road for our trek to the west coast and the Isle of Skye. Our route out of Inverness took us southwest along the River Ness to the Urquhart Castle ruins. The castle was built on the shores of Loch Ness from the 13th to the 16th century and had a tumultuous history, having been raided multiple times, played a role in the War of Scottish Independence, and was partially destroyed in 1692 to prevent its use by the Jacobite forces. Visitors to Urquhart Castle in Loch Ness rarely see its most infamous inhabitant, the Loch Ness Monster. Kathy and I were shocked to catch a glimpse of Nessie herself. Continuing west an hour and a half, we came to another iconic castle, the Eilean Donan Castle, which is situated at the junction of 3 lochs. It was originally built in the 13th century and named after a 6th century Irish saint, Bishop Donan. The castle had been destroyed, rebuilt, and expanded several times, and is the historic seat of clans MacRae and Mackenzie. Descendants of Clan MacRae still own and use the castle for special events. It's also a popular location for films and TV shows, including Highlander, The World Is Not Enough, Maid of Honor, and many others. From Eilean Donan, it was another hour drive onto the Isle of Skye and into the town of Portree. We stopped at Gasta Pizzeria for some excellent wood fire pizza on our way to the Dal Riata bed and breakfast, where we stayed for the next 3 nights while exploring all parts of the Isle of Skye. By now, you probably guessed we had yet another traditional Scottish breakfast at our B&B before heading out for the day of amazing scenic drives and hikes along the Trotternish Peninsula of the Isle of Skye, known as the Trotternish Loop. Fortunately, there was enough hiking to burn off those calories from breakfast. Exploring the most popular sites on the loop was an all-day affair with about an hour-and-a-half drive time and 5 hours of hiking at 4 main stops along the way. First was maybe the most famous attraction on the Isle of Skye, the Old Man of Storr. This 180-foot-tall jagged rock pinnacle is a remnant of volcanic activity and is a very popular hike for obvious reasons. The out and back was only about 3.5 miles, but included over 1,000 feet of elevation gain, breathtaking views, and an unexpected detour that included a couple of scary rock scrambles up the iconic rock formations. You can't go to Scotland without doing this one. Back in the car, and a short 10-minute drive north took us to a small but very pretty Lealt Falls, and then a few minutes further to Kilt Rock and Mealt Falls. These very impressive 300-foot cliffs with waterfalls plunging to the rocky coastline were well worth the stop, and there was even a piper busking at one of the popular overlooks. After 20 more minutes in the car, it was time for our second hike of the day. The Quiraing is another dramatic geological formation known for otherworldly terrain and surreal rock formations with names like the Needle, the Prison, and the Table. The views from these trails were amazing. We chose another 3-mile out and back with about 600 feet of elevation gain. This was probably my favorite hike of our trip. Our final stop on the Trotternish Loop was Fairy Glen. Fairy Glen is another area with unique-looking landscape. Grassy mounds, cone-shaped hills with ridges and spirals in the hills were like nothing we'd ever seen. It's a relatively small area and didn't take long to explore the whole glen. From there, it was just another 30-minute drive down the west side of the peninsula into Portree and our B&B to get ready for a nice dinner at Seabreeze's Seafood Restaurant on Portree Pier. Well, it was a nice dinner for me, but Kathy isn't a fan of seafood, and that's pretty much all they serve. She did find some squash soup and potatoes to get her by until they brought the sticky toffee pudding for dessert. Oh, the fresh seafood platter was great. We packed even more into our second day on the Isle of Skye, exploring the western portion of the island. After we left the bed and breakfast with a packed breakfast to go, it was about a 40-minute drive to the Fairy Pools, a series of natural pools and waterfalls in Glen Brittle. We enjoyed the relatively easy hike, and since we started early in the morning, there were more sheep walking with us than people. You're probably wondering if we were going to visit Scotland and not tour a distillery. Well, we did. Just a few minutes from the Fairy Pools in Carboost sits Talisker Distillery. Founded in 1830, Talisker is a single malt Scotch whiskey distillery that's the oldest working distillery on the Isle of Skye.
We're going to have a tour around the facility today. I'll show you some of the sort of key points in the production of Talisker whiskey. Then later on we'll move back down to the visitor centre where we'll actually have a guided tasting. Now some of you are probably experienced whiskey drinkers, some of you it may be new to you. But we'll just try and show you how we get the best out of a whiskey when we're tasting it. And these are the 3 whiskies that we'll be tasting later on. And see that these all come from the same spirit that we produce here. That's one of the things about the distillery here. We make one whiskey, we make one spirit, and that becomes different whiskies through the later maturation process. Now essentially, as I said, whiskey is 2 main ingredients. There's barley and water. There is a 3rd ingredient added for fermentation, that's the yeast. And if you wanted to be really poetic, you could say thyme is a 4th ingredient as well. But let's keep it cracking.
We both really enjoyed the tour and the education, but weren't even the least bit tempted to buy the 1,100-pound, 30-year-old bottle of single malt. One thing that struck me about our entire Scotland vacation is that there are very few trees. In fact, the Scots can't even make whiskey without importing oak barrels from the United States. For lunch, Kathy indulged my seafood craving once again at the oyster shed before we got back on the road. Kathy had a protein bar. People have asked if it was hard to get used to driving on the left side of the road. I tell them it doesn't really matter what side of the road you're on if it's only one lane. The Scots call it a single-track road, and we drove on quite a few. Besides the locals who drive very confidently on these roads, the greatest challenge might have been sharing the road with the sheep. And we saw a lot of sheep.
Well, bad to you too.
Does that feel good to you? Is your mama talking to you? I don't know which one is your mom. I don't know which one is your mom. Hi, are you gonna get? Hi, baby. Precious. So sweet. Can't believe she came to.
Another 30 minutes up the coast, our next stop was Dunvegan Castle and Gardens. Dunvegan is the oldest continuously inhabited castle in Scotland and is the seat of the Clan MacLeod, whose family has occupied the castle for 800 years. It's a beautiful castle and gardens and has also been used as the backdrop for several TV shows and movies. We then headed due west for our final attraction of the day, Neast Point and the Neast Point Lighthouse. This is the most westerly point on the Isle of Skye. The walk down to the lighthouse had more amazing views, and while it was only a 2-mile hike, it involved about 550 feet of elevation change with some very steep sections with long stretches of concrete steps. The cliffs, seagulls, and large field full of stones of remembrance, as well as the lighthouse, made this stop a great way to end our exploration of Skye. We then headed back to Portree one last time and had dinner at Caberfide, a casual bar and restaurant that also had very good pizza and another local beer. Our 6th day in Scotland involved an early morning start, another takeaway breakfast from our B&B, and a 3-hour drive through Fort William and back to the Glenfinnan Viaduct. We needed to arrive at 9:30 sharp so we could be in the best position right on time to view the Jacobite steam train, aka the Harry Potter train. Being the type of people that we are, we did achieve the best viewing position high on the hill overlooking the viaduct. We then sat for an hour with a couple hundred other tourists waiting for the train to puff its way toward us and over the famous bridge. Definitely worth the effort.
That's what it's doing. It knows exactly what we all want.
Back in Fort William, we made a quick stop at the old Inverloch Castle, a ruined 13th century castle that's only about a mile from the center of Fort William. It's felt to be one of the first stone castles in Scotland and remains largely unchanged since its construction. We made one more stop for a little more hiking and the longest distance views of our trip. The Grampian Mountains are just 2 miles east of Fort William and include Ben Nevis, the highest mountain in Scotland, and Unic Moor Mountain, ski area and hiking trails. Since we didn't have the time or energy to hike to the top of these mountains, we rode the ski lift and then hiked around at the top of Unic Moor to some amazing vistas. The hang glider flew right above us and was quite entertaining. We then checked into one of the few actual hotels that we stayed at on our trip, the Garrison Hotel, also in Fort William, and walked to dinner at the Geographer. This bistro also did not disappoint. And of course, I had another local brew. Day 7 brought us to the 2 days of our trip that we explored my Campbell family ancestry around the county or council area of Argyll and Bute in the glacial valley of Glenorchy around beautiful Loch. We first headed south on a 2-hour drive to the Kilmartin Church and Graveyard, but learned that along the way sits Barcaldine Castle, one of several castles built by my 10th great-grandfather, Sir Duncan Campbell of Glenorchy in the late 1500s and early 1600s. He was also known as Sir Duncan the Black and Black Duncan of the Castles because he built at least 7 castles in the region. We visited a couple more of his castles the next day. Barcaldine Castle was rebuilt at the turn of the 20th century and is now a high-end bed and breakfast. The keeper of the castle was quite enthusiastic and insisted on giving us a tour and taking our picture before we left. As we pulled away, we saw the only Highland cows or hairy coos that we were to see the entire trip. Apparently, they keep these iconic cows away from main roads since tourists stop traffic to take their picture, which creates quite a road hazard. We next arrived at Kilmartin Church and Graveyard. Kilmartin Church was built in 1834, but stands on the site of multiple older churches dating back to the 4th century, before the arrival of Christianity to Western Scotland. Kilmartin literally means the Church of St. Martin. The medieval grave slabs enshrined here date back to the 13th century, which is about 200 years before my 13th and 14th great-grandfather Campbell were buried somewhere in this graveyard. Even if we happened to see either of their gravestones, the engraving would be impossible to read. We then headed northeast along the shores of Loch Fyne to the famous Inverary Castle. Inverary Castle is the second of 3 castles with historic significance to the Campbell clan. It's the ancestral home and seat of the Duke of Argyll, chief of Clan Campbell, since the 18th century. The current Duke, Torquil Campbell, lives here with his wife Eleanor and their 3 children. Eleanor is the 3rd great-granddaughter of the founder of Cadbury Chocolate Company. Inverary is another castle often seen in TV and movies. Anybody watch Downton Abbey? Ironically, when we got back to our hotel the same night we visited this castle, we flipped on the newest episode of The Diplomat, and lo and behold, much of it was filmed in the very rooms we just toured. After checking into our hotel, the Brambles of Inverary, which is just around the corner from the castle in the town of Inverary, we explored the main street, its shops, and an old church before heading to dinner at the George Hotel. The restaurant and bar are in a centuries-old exposed stone lower level with a cool vibe, excellent food, and another locally brewed beer. Our second day in Argyll was spent exploring multiple sites around Glenorchy and Loch, where my direct Campbell ancestors lived for 34 generations, more than 1,300 years, until my 4th great-grandfather, John William Campbell, emigrated from Argyll to Butler County, Pennsylvania in 1768, around the time of America's founding. We began at the picturesque ruins of another castle that's historically significant to Clan Campbell. Kilcoon Castle at the north end of Loch was built around 1449 by my 14th great-grandfather, Sir Colin Campbell, the first Lord of Glenorchy, and was expanded, improved, and repaired by my 10th, 11th, and 13th great-grandfathers. The castle served as a home, fortress, and stronghold for the Campbells of Glenorchy, who dominated the Central Highlands from the 1430s for more than 2 centuries. It was significantly damaged by lightning and completely abandoned by 1760, but remains one of the most photographed castles in all of Scotland. Our next stop, about 30-minute drive around the west side of Loch, was Kiltrennan Parish Churchyard. This currently active church, built in 1771, sits on the site of an earlier church built in the 13th century. The grave slabs here are felt to date back to at least the 1300s. According to several online ancestry sites, it's likely that my direct Campbell ancestors were buried here for 20 generations from the 5th to the 13th centuries. 12 of those generations were prior to when they were called Campbell, They were known as O'Dubain when they migrated from Sligo, Ireland in the 400s AD. Loch is a really beautiful lake. Kathy and I enjoyed driving along its shore, stopping, jumping out of the car to take pictures as we made our way back to St. Conan's Kirk, which overlooks the loch, just 2 miles from Kilcoon Castle. St. Conan's Kirk was built in the late 1800s by another branch of the Campbell clan in the area. It's built of local stone and oak beams from wooden battleships. In addition to the nave and chancel, it contains a small chapel with an effigy of Robert the Bruce, King of Scots, who fought and brought Scotland independence in the early 1300s. The wooden box below the effigy is said to contain a fragment of bone from Robert's tomb. You might think we'd be done looking at churches and cemeteries, but we still had 2 more to go. We headed due east about 45 minutes, where we could visit the Killen Cemetery and Finlarig Castle, just a few steps away from each other. My 8th through 12th great-grandfathers were buried here. My 11th great-grandfather, Grey Colin Campbell, took a leading part in promoting the Reformation and was a member of the Parliament in 1560 when Protestantism was established in Scotland. My 10th great-grandfather, Black Duncan of the Castles, was buried within the grounds of Finlarig Castle that he built in the early 1600s. Long since abandoned and in ruins, the crumbling castle structures in an overgrowth of brush and trees made it fun to walk and climb through. We then made our longest drive of the day, more than an hour and a half south, to historic Kilman Parish Church and Argyll Mausoleum. Unfortunately, it was closed by the time we got there, so we explored the outside of the building, and yes, another graveyard. Kilman was established as one of the first Christian communities in western Scotland around 600 AD. My 15th great-grandfather, Sir Duncan Campbell, 1st Lord Campbell of Loch, was head of the Campbell clan for 40 years and one of the founders of the Collegiate Church of Kilman on this site. He gave money to build the church in 1442, which became the Campbell clan's spiritual home. Sir Duncan became the first of many clan chiefs to be buried here, under the church floor. Ornate effigies of Duncan and his wife, Lady Marjorie Stewart, great-great-granddaughter of Robert the Bruce, lay exposed under a carved arch in the mausoleum. Exploring the Glenorchy Valley, walking where one branch of my ancestors lived and died for 1,300 years, and pondering what their lives must have been like is quite sobering. While there are likely millions of living descendants of my Campbell ancestors, few will be able to explore as we have. In the words of C.T. Studd, "Only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last." Our final day in Scotland began with a short hike in the Balloch Castle Country Park within Loch Lomond and Trusacks National Park. This trail was actually through some woods and along the shores of Loch Lomond, one of the rare wooded areas that we saw in Scotland. We were kind of killing time because the final attraction of our trip didn't begin until noon. We planned the timing of this vacation so we could attend the first day of the Highland Games. We were definitely glad we were able to see this kickoff event at Battery Park in Inverclyde.
Today has a lot of great competitions ahead, and I wish every competitor the best of luck.
The Highland Games are actually a series of more than 60 events held in multiple locations between May and September each year. The Highland Games really let you know that you're in Scotland, with competitions in traditional Scottish dance, bagpipe, tug-of-war, and heavy events including caber toss, hammer throw, stone put, and various weight throws for distance and height, and the sheaf toss. Bagpipe competitions, just called piping in Scotland, are very popular and take up most of the space in the park. A large number of pipe bands practice, tune, and compete all over the grounds. We thought it was interesting to see people using smartphone apps to tune each other's instruments. The bands always stand in a circle with the drummers in the middle, twirling their mallets, with the judges around the perimeter or seated at the judging table. We just walked back and forth to catch all the events, taking breaks to grab food from a couple of the many food trucks. If you traveled to Scotland, don't miss the Highland Games. For us, they were a perfect end to a vacation that we'll never forget. Last stop, the Glasgow Airport, and on to Ireland.